Hello, Brain Damage Philosopher here, and since I'm still recovering from the whiplash incident yesterday, I'm still putting off my video on transcendental arguments for the existence of God. So in this video, I'm going to cover another sort of easier and more colloquial argument that theists often make about religion. So, the argument that I want to cover is the one that basically says that whether or not religion is true, you should judge a worldview by its fruits. And while religion, on the one hand, has been, the motivator, or at least, hasn't done anything too terrible, atheism, on the other hand, through the likes of Hitler, Mao, and Stalin, has, basically caused some of the greatest mass genocides and killings and suffering of the 20th century. And so if we have to select a belief system, then we should select religion for that reason. So the first thing I want to say is that although saying this to a religious person won't be very convincing to them, and it's really not that convincing to me, it should be noted that this is an appeal to consequences, which is a logical fallacy. If you are trying to argue for the truth of a belief, appealing to the consequences of holding some belief isn't a good way to demonstrate the truth, unless we are talking about consequences in the form of making accurate predictions or something like that. So when a religious person is making this argument, the only way in which to take it is to take it not as an attempt to prove that religion is correct, but instead as an attempt to say that religion and atheism are essentially on equal footing, at least as far as evidence goes. Basically, neither really has any evidence for, and so, since there's not really an argument for one or the other, you should just choose one based on other factors, like how good they are for society. So already making this argument is either making an appeal to consequences that is invalid, or it's admitting that there is no evidence outside of faith, and faith isn't evidence. That there is no evidence for religion, and so you should select it based on, consequences only. But then, so on that basis, right, assuming that what religious person is saying is the more logical thing to say, basically that even if there's no evidence for religion over atheism, religion has better outcomes, and so we should choose that. There are still many responses that an atheist can make. For instance, an atheist can point out that there is nothing inherent in atheism or naturalism that leads to the beliefs of Hitler, Stalin, or Mao. Hitler, Stalin, and Mao had to have certain specific and dogmatically held beliefs about the nature of reality that were in fact wrong and have been shown to be wrong. So, and yet they dogmatically held to them no matter what, right? And so in essence, this sort of dogmatically holding to incorrect beliefs about reality is actually the same process of thinking that leads people to take part in religion. So while nothing in atheism or naturalism naturally leads to fascism or communism, the sort of way of thinking that leads to religion is the same way of thinking that led to fascism and communism. It can also be pointed out that if the idea is to select a belief system based just on the utilitarian general outcomes for, everyone or all of society, why would it not be possible to, from scratch, design a belief system, perhaps adapting elements from religion, perhaps not, that is designed from the outset to maximize this? Because there's nothing about religion that necessarily indicates that it is designed in any way to maximize the outcomes of society. So if that's what we're optimizing for, why not come up with a custom-built belief system to do that? Furthermore, the point can be made that throughout the history of, for instance, Christianity, there have been many inquisitions and massacres and theocratic governments ruling with an iron fist and using the Christian doctrine as justification, not to mention slavery. Some of those things that were done are directly and explicitly condoned by scriptures, such as slavery, and some were perhaps distortions. But in any case, they used their Christianity as an excuse to do these things, whereas Hitler, Stalin, and Mao did not use their atheism as an excuse, but their specific beliefs about reality and human nature and economics and politics as justifications. Furthermore, although atheists could point out that the terrible things and genocides and such that religious people have done in the past are far smaller in scale than the massacres that happened in the 20th century, I could respond to that objection by pointing out that the 20th century was also when the first war machines that made such massacres possible, and the first types of states that made the mobilization of those war machines possible emerged. And if those kinds of states, the larger, more industrialized societies, and also the war machines, if those had been available, in the Middle Ages and so on, I have no doubt that the massacres committed by religious people would have been just as great. So yeah, to sum up those points real quick. First of all, the massacres were not done as a result of atheism or a justification, were not justified by atheism. They were in fact done as a result of beliefs that were arrived at through processes of thinking that are very similar to religion. And then I could also point out that we could create another belief system that looks like a religion but is designed from the ground up to maximize outcome, if that's what we care about. And then furthermore, the point that the reason likely that the massacres that religion committed were much smaller than the ones that the fascists and communists committed were because the social structures and technology simply wasn't there to do something on that scale. So it wouldn't have been possible, even though they probably might have wanted it. I could also point out that, for instance, anti-Semitism is actually in large part a product of Christianity. There's we could look at the blood libel and the way that Christians referred to Jews for a very long time as, the killers, Christ killers, and stuff like that. I could further point out that the Germans had "God with us" inscribed on their belt buckles, and the Catholic Church actually supported Hitler's regime until he started persecuting Christians, and even while he was persecuting other groups. I could point out that there are many common features in, for instance, communism and Christianity. For instance, a sort of eschatology where they believe that some final thing can be looked forward to that justifies all of our actions here, and stuff like that. There are many other things that I could say, but the core point is that these were not an actual result of atheism. They were a result of religious-like thinking. So, I think that's it then.